Welcome to CEO Connect, a podcast series brought to you by the Headstrong Project. Each episode features leaders who are finding better ways to support veterans in the workplace and build more people-centered organizations. Today's episode features two visionary executives with deep experience in service and workforce leadership. Larry Richardson is the CEO and chairman of AmeriPro Health. A Marine Corps veteran, former firefighter, and longtime paramedic, he has led the company through rapid growth, focusing on resilience, innovation, and strong support for veterans and frontline workers. Michael D'Ambrose is a retired Chief Human Resources Officer with decades of experience leading global workforces at Boeing, ADM, and Citigroup, and has long championed veteran hiring, leadership development, and workplace wellness. Leading today's conversation is our host, a social impact leader and founding member of HirePurpose, Steve Amsden.
So why don't we jump right in? The first question I had for you both is, what makes veterans some of the strongest people you can hire?
As a veteran, I spent time in the Marine Corps, got out, went into public safety, and then, eventually ended up starting my business. And the one thing that I noticed about veterans that is really unique is the speed at which they can execute. They can go in, they can find a problem. They're very good at problem solving, isolating a problem and then solving it, and then asking for the next one. So that's one of the most immediate things that I can think of, as well as the structured discipline that they're used to in the military. They're a lot more adaptable, as well as, and they're also very broad in their knowledge. Where do you find most, a 22-year-old that has been to 3 different countries and in different cultures and had to experience things like that, as well as experiencing, different work. When I was in the Marine Corps, I was everything from a janitor to a rifleman to a missile tech to a radio tech. I mean, it's just a multitude of different disciplines. And I think that is what put me in a position to be where I am today. And that's probably the biggest strength that I think that they have.
How about you, Michael?
Yeah. Well, first of all, Larry, I got to tell you, it's just an honor to be on this call with you. I mean, it's just thank you for your service and thank you for all you're doing, for our country and success in your business. I never served in the military, but I've been committed to, hiring veterans and for me, there's something the military does that distinguishes itself, and I think makes military hires so important and so successful. In corporate America, we think we can train people. We put people in a classroom, we give them new things to learn, and then we send them off on their way. In the military, all learning is applied. In fact, in every single way in the military, when we teach or when the military teaches, they expect their people to go out and apply that learning immediately, then reflect upon it and make it better. It is a distinguishing change that in terms of learning that they carry with them to the private sector. So when a veteran's hired in a company, the 2 things that I've noticed in every single veteran I've ever worked with, number one, they recognize day one, teams drive success, and they are a team member above and beyond. Their commitment to making sure the person next to them is successful is true in every single veteran I've ever met and ever hired. So they want the team to succeed, not just themselves. And that's something that military embeds in every single one who serves. Number 2, what I talked about earlier, they understand that learning only matters when it's applied. So when they sit and learn something, they're immediately reflecting on, how am I going to apply this into my job? How am I going to take this learning and make what I do better? And that's what I think distinguishes veterans as hires. They are just tremendous team players, and they are truly understand how to apply learning.
Why is military experience still so misunderstood in corporate America? And why don't we go back up to you, Larry?
It drives me crazy. There's so many issues. I think the language of work doesn't translate well. I have helped hundreds, if not thousands, of people in the military try to interpret their resumes and their backgrounds into the private sector. They could be driving, a huge 18-wheel truck for 10 years, come out and they're not licensed. They have all kinds of experiences that are truly unique and applicable to the private sector. but there's all kinds of acronyms, all kinds of terms that don't actually apply. And so understanding the great vast skills and experience that veterans have and the roles they could play in the private sector is just a huge language problem. And it's one that I think deserves really special attention. I hope um, that, that our government gets around to it. I think many governors, and by the way, in states have, looked at this over and over. There's been commissions that have looked at this. But I think it's one of the big misses. How do we translate the great experiences and knowledge of veterans into private sector work?
Yeah, and I think one of the things is coming from the Marine Corps, the biggest thing in the Marine Corps is like, oh, they're all brainwashed. Well, that's not the case. And they think that we're very one track minded, very to my earlier point, they're very good at executing, but not very good at deterring and changing their position or how they can do more than just one thing. And when we look at veterans, that's not the case. They're usually very adaptable, very able to learn new disciplines. And, for us, I just, my opinion is I think that a lot of it's misunderstood because it's not, it's poor education on the corporate side. And
Yes.
they don't have experience with it. They don't know what it's like. They see what it is on TikTok and Instagram and, all the news reels about what, the military really does, but they don't understand that that's the combat elements of the military are a very small portion of the military. When you look at 90% of the military is not combat element and it supports a combat element. And there's everything from every discipline you can think about, from nutrition to medicine to radiology to construction to engineering to you name it. There's all these different disciplines, and I think that they're not sexy. Those aren't the sexy type of things that we want to portray on our social media and news networks. We want to, portray the SEAL teams and, all the special forces and all that stuff, which is a very small element of the military. But, when you look at what it takes, my chief of staff, Jeff Erdwine, Lieutenant Colonel, F-18 retired pilot, he's like, try to move, you know, 30 aircraft from America to Afghanistan to, provide air support. That's logistics. That's not flying, that's logistics. He did logistics as much as he did aircrafts. So, very unique in how the military functions. And I think that it's just really misunderstood because it's lack of education on the corporate side.
What's the biggest shock when transitioning from military service to corporate life?
Yeah, I think that inside the military, there's a set of more formalized process and rules of engagement, almost to speak, not from a warfare perspective, but here's my role, and there's lots of clarity. In the private sector, there's less clarity and
Yeah.
less process, and I think that's one of the things that early on people struggle with. Do I have absolute clarity over what I'm supposed to do? What are the record? What are you asking of me? And I think it just takes a little time, but very quickly, my experience is they learn very quickly. There's a basketball in the hallway. It doesn't have my name on it, but I know I can grab it. I'm going to go grab the basketball. And that's what makes veteran hire so special. But it is an adaptation. I mean, it's different.
Yeah, being a Marine veteran, I went straight through that. I got out, actually went into public safety, and I was thinking that I was going into a paramilitary type quasi organization, and I was
Yeah.
like, this is nothing like that. I was like, I come out as a recruit in the fire service, and my captain's like, hey, go tear down that wall right there. There was no questions like, well, why do I have to do it, or what do you want me to do it with? It's like I went and tear down the wall, because that's what, and it was just immediate. And I think that's the strength of a veteran. But it does. And then when you're looking around and you're starting to see these other people that are starting, that haven't don't have that service, they don't have that drive, and you're like, what in the world is going on? Jeff Ertwine and I started laughing the other day, like, man, if we could just everything could function like the Marine Corps, it'd be great. Because there's just there's so much structure, there's so much process. To Michael's point, there's all of these things that everything is an acronym, everything is some level of this, do this, and this, and there's all of these things of structure to put in place to reduce the amount of failure. And in the corporate world, Even at AmeriPro, we started 8 years ago. This coming up April, we're in 10 states, 1,500 employees. And when you're talking about being able to put in process and trying to build structure within an organization of that size to grow to we want to grow to, double the size in a year, there's a lot of process that has to be put in place. And we find that usually the military, the veterans are like, they're really easy. They're like, yeah, I got it. More process, I get it. Whereas the ambiguity from the civilian side, they don't quite get it as much. So that's the struggle that I think veterans see, because they see their cohorts on the civilian side trying, but they quickly adapt. And to Michael's point, they usually rise to the top, and it's very successful for them if they're able to be able to adapt.
Has our country done enough to help veterans build careers after service?
I got out 25 years ago, and I'll speak to that experience. It wasn't a lot. It was, hey, look, go to this 4-hour class and good luck. So no, I don't think that. But being a disabled vet, one of the things that I was able to access with a VA was a vocational rehabilitation program, and so I converted some of my GI Bill over to that. I got a bachelor's degree, I got a master's degree, which put me in a position to be able to meet people to say, hey, look, I have an idea about a business. And then, got investors, got things going. And, but that was all on me. But we try to work with VRE programs, across the country to say, hey, look, there are ways to do this. I went from when I started this business, just as a firefighter, paramedic in the back of an ambulance. And then when I, decided to go to education, the one thing that I think that veterans have to do and understand is it's not going to be given to them because of the vast size of the military. You have to go get it. You have to be very purposeful, driven, and what you want, and use the resources that the VA does have, because the VA does have some amazing resources to be able to help you with that transition. And I can't even count the amount of veterans with some of their disability stuff as well as some of their educational stuff that they could do, and they were like, oh my God, I never even knew about this. So but it's been me helping them through the process. And then they're getting a voc rehab program, and hey, look, they're getting a bachelor's degree, they're getting a master's degree, and then they're going into finance or accounting or whatever it is. And they're like, man, I really appreciate it because I never knew that this was here. So I think probably the VA, maybe not the VA, but the military itself could probably do a little bit better communication on that. It has gotten a lot better. I would say probably in the last year and a half, it's gotten really good. And we're, but it's also other veterans like myself who are reaching out to the VA, who are reaching out and trying to build these networks of, sustainability for employment across, from transitioning over. So, there's always room for improvement, but it has gotten a lot better.
How about you, Michael? What do you think?
Yeah. Well, I don't think we do enough. I mean, bottom line for me, somebody steps up to the plate to serve our nation in the military deserves the very best on the transition out, period. I think there's a lot of resources trying to do a good work in this, and I think there's great intentions here. But even the very simplest of things, Larry, I'm sure this happened. I'm in the military. I put in my papers for discharge. I have no idea when I'm getting out. I don't have a date. It's kind of a mystery. Employers struggle with that. How do I hire a person when I don't know when they're available? So, one of the things I've done in my career is try to make offers that we make to veterans over an extended period of time, even as much as a year, so that they can understand I have a job waiting for me. I just don't have the exact start date. So I think there's more that can be done. I think, to be honest, we always ask the government and the military to step up to do more. And I think this is one where companies can step up and do more too.
Absolutely.
And I think, the companies I've worked for, I've been very, very proud of. They've understood the value of veteran hires. And, really, made a point to be on base, to be there to talk to people, to run seminars and programs to help them understand it, to take those resumes and try to interpret them to private sector work, even if it wasn't for the companies that I worked for, just to help them transition. Um, but I actually think there should be a revisit of the whole process. I think if you think about the tools that are available today with, Gen AI and others, I think we could make this better. I also think that governors in their states, there are licensing requirements that states have for certain jobs that the military clearly has experience and demonstrated skill sets to be successful, yet the transfer from the federal to the state does not work. And there needs to be a way for the states to recognize the skill sets of those veterans and to immediately license them to be able to do the same work that they were doing efficiently and effectively in the military itself. So I'm hoping that more and more governors step up to the plate and actually make those changes.
Yeah, I'd like to add on to that. I do agree with is one of the things that you touched on is looking that was, I hired a resume writer to help extract the information of what I did in the military to be able to, you know, translate it over into when I got the resume back, I was like, holy cow. I mean, I was like, wow, I was 23 years old running $47.5 million of equipment. I had, 40 direct reports. I was like, well, I don't think like that. In the military, I didn't think like that. But when you look at it from a corporate side, they're like, wow, this guy really knows how to manage things and do things like that. So I do think that that is probably a big gap, as well as, having that ability to translate what we do in the military, even, from combat elements. I mean, combat elements, yeah, there's not combat in the civilian side, but what they do and how they maneuver and all of those things, the logistics side, all of those things are skills that can translate directly over. Prime example, paramedics and EMTs that are, you know, in the Army and Air Force and Marines doesn't have them, but in the Navy that, okay, they were in battle, as an element attached to a grunt unit. We're, doing sutures, we're doing all of these things. And then that doesn't translate to be a paramedic in the civilian side when they're providing more care that in the military than we actually do in the civilian side. And then we have to push them through a EMT, a paramedic program, which is 2 years. And, there should be some more, uh, insight into how do you translate all of those skills straight into our business, because the little things that we can train, to Michael's point, we can put them in a classroom, we can teach them documentation, we can teach them the things that we need to know about the business, but from a clinical standpoint, care standpoint, they've got it.
They do.
And that's the important part.
Yeah, Larry, too, just to add even further, and I hope I'm not messing this up, Steve talking, but today in the private sector, the HR teams are using more and more AI to sort
Mhm.
through resumes and applicants. I don't think the military resumes and the people helping them are prepared enough to understand that keywords matter so that they get deselected even before they get an opportunity to get an interview too early. And so I'm hopeful that more and more private, sector companies are stepping up. I think they will, because there's a shortage of the kind of skill sets that the military brings. But interpreting resumes today and applying for jobs is becoming tougher for the military than ever before.
Yeah, I experienced that myself. I did a resume. I had a bachelor's degree. I was trying to find a job, but even then, before the AI thing, they were still using keyword searches that I just never got
Sure.
picked up. And I went and paid to have someone write me a government resume and a civilian resume. And immediately when I had that done, the job offer started coming in like crazy. But it was like, well, I mean, I spent almost $2,000 to do that,
Wow.
and that was on my own, but it was to circumvent the systems and to get your resume added up to
Yeah.
get past those keyword filters.
What does real support for mental health look like in the workplace?
When you look at mental health, both from a veteran standpoint and then translating over to fire, EMS, police, dispatch, all of that stuff, a lot of people in America do not understand the daily grind that our public safety has to endure. Because as when you think about what we do, we're regardless of what people call us at, what we may think of emergency, it's their emergency. And there's emotions. You are there at the bedside of people dying. You see multiple, I'll give you an example, and this is probably kind of harsh, but when I was applying for a federal job, it was with an intelligence agency, and they were like, one of the questions they asked me was, well, how do you deal with stress, and what makes you think you can come here and deal with the stress that we have? And I said, I looked at the interview, and I was like, well, I've been a paramedic for 15 years, and how many times has someone handed you, a child that was not breathing or was in cardiac arrest, and would you deal with that? Oh, by the way, it's raining and it's thunderstorming and there's no lights and, it's in a ditch somewhere. And they're like, oh, I couldn't even imagine that. I said, well, I've done that as a daily routine. And they're like, wow. So when you think about all of those things, PTSD is real. There are some resources out there. One of the things that we're doing at AmeriPro for 2026 as the CEO, I'm putting an implementation of a chaplaincy across our entire footprint of our company, non-denominational chaplaincy that people can go to just talk, across, and Michael can probably just speak to this. There's EAP programs. Every company has EAP programs. The effectiveness of them is debatable. I think that companies should own that as one of their things, especially in the EMS world. When you think of public safety, you think of like fire departments, police departments, and all that. Well, EMS, our annual growth rate, our compounded annual growth rate of demand every year is going up 9.6%, which is a lot. So you think about the population growth in America, there's more need for 911 services. There's more need for interfacility transfer services as hospital diversify their service lines. So when you think about the things that our paramedics and EMTs see, it is every day. And some of it may not be, the gunshot or the cardiac arrest. It may be you're taking an 89-year-old grandmother to hospice, because she doesn't have a family. And those things have impact. They have real impact. Been there, done that. I've got that t-shirt. And, the biggest way that I was able to deal with some of those struggles was through a chaplaincy program, in dealing with my own pastor and working through things. And, even starting a business, I'll go ahead and tell you, starting a business was no easy feat. I mean, 2 heart attacks, I had them. And it's constantly a struggle. It's constantly, mental health. People have discounted it for decades. And I think now it plays a real role in not just, the veterans' lives, but public safety. And we have to take an active role in it. And, but, thanks to some of the most amazing people on the planet, that there are people who are willing to do that. And they're willing to take on that struggle. None of us get in this business to be, multimillionaires. That's just not what it is. It's a vision of service, and thankful for the people that decide to do that. But, it's our responsibility as leaders in organizations, whether it be public, government, or whatever, to help elevate and provide more mental health resources.
Larry, I don't know you, like we haven't really met in person yet, but boy, I just want to reach across and give you a big hug. It's, it's, we bring our whole selves to work. We don't just go to work and, people think, okay, everything goes away. It doesn't work that way. I'm having trouble with my family. I'm having my own mental health challenges. And you're right. EAPs have struggled for a long time to be effective. One of the challenges, I mean, companies, all the ones I work for, spent millions and millions of dollars on EAPs, and we struggle to get people to even use them until it's too late. And it's always been a frustration for me. I'm very excited though about the future in this from a private sector perspective. There's several companies that I've been advising that are using AI tools now to be coaches. And in the coaching capacity, they're looking at, the whole life of a person and saying, how can I help you? And I think getting ahead of those mental health challenges before they become debilitating is important. And I'm hopeful some of these new products, some of these new tools and technology will help people in ways that we've never been able to help them before. I also think companies truly recognize, we used to, in fact, let me step back for a second. Many companies still measure engagement as kind of the score they look for. I want an engaged workforce. And I think about that a lot because I think that engagement's not enough. Yeah, I'm applied at work. I got it. I'm focused, but I want more out of people. I want someone to own the success of the company. I want someone to step up and grab that ball in the hallway. And that happens when someone feels truly valued and is actually happy. And to be happy, you have to be happy in life. And that's tough. And that's why companies are reaching out to try to help people in every way they can, because they recognize that, you know, that a positive person is positive in every way. In fact, there's a whole science around it that's been researched
Yep.
called the growth mindset. We know that people who come to work with a positive attitude, a growth mindset, that it's infectious to others, that it drives success in every way. And so mental health is something we're all struggling with. And I don't even know if there's a person on the planet, by the way, who hasn't struggled with something in their life. And this isn't heaven. I wish it was, but it's not. And because of that, we all struggle. And the question is, how do we all find the way to be patient and help each other? Because the reward is great, because that, you know, growth mindset, that happiness drives other people to be happy. And what's a greater gift than that?
I want to come over and hug you, Michael. That was beautiful. That
Yeah.
was really, really both well said.
I'd like to add to that too. That's one of the things that, we just had a leadership meeting, and one of the things that I said was, hey, look, um, a lot of people have this thing of just go to work, do your job, and go home and just leave it there. That's impossible.
Impossible.
It's not, it's impossible. I think as Americans, as workers, veterans, public, whatever industry you are in, you have to be personal because you are intimately involved with your business, no matter what it is. You're intimately involved with your businesses, and here's why: because whatever you're doing, whether you're working as an electrician, a paramedic, whatever it is, that is your livelihood. That is what provides for your family. That is what provides for your health insurance. All of these different things that it provides for. And to say that it's not personal is completely inaccurate. I think you have to make it personal. I think you have to make it, when you go to work, is just like, I have a relationship with my employer. I have a relationship that I want to build with them, an ecosystem that's going to change the world, whatever that is. And I told all of our, directors and leadership, I said, look, make it personal. If you see something, say something. Make it. Don't just be like, that's not. That negatively affects the organization, which in turn negatively affects you. And be that positive. Be that positive movement when you come to work, because it is intimate. I mean, you deal when you think about when you're at work. I work 80 hours a week, and I don't see my family that much, but I see my CFO, my COO, all of our directors. I'm with them, a lot of the time, and you can't help but make it personal. And it doesn't mean that you drop accountability or anything like that, but it means that you make it yours. And I think when that's another thing about veterans is I'll speak to the Marine Corps, is when you went into the Marine Corps, you went in to become a Marine. And I think it was General James Mattis said there's no such thing as a ex-Marine or a former Marine. You're a Marine for life. And I think that goes for all the service branches, though, whatever it
Yeah.
is. You're a sailor, you're a soldier, you're an airman, but that's it was personal. When you take that oath to go and serve your country, you are writing a blank check to include up to your life. If that's not personal, I don't know what is. So I think that in America, we're like, well, just go home and, go to your job and just leave it and then go home. That's impossible. It's irresponsible. And the more that we can transition for that to understand that our place of employment is very much a part of our lives, the better the workforce gets.
Yeah. Larry, if I could, Steve, I don't I mean to jump in again, but it's It's funny, as an HR person, my whole career, I've often, figured, wondered what defines a great company versus a good company. What's the difference? And I've been lucky enough to work for companies that truly understand this. That what makes a company great are not the policies and practices that they have. It's the exceptions they make to those policies and practices. It's because they recognize that our goal is to treat everybody the way we would want to be treated, and we live every day with great care. I had an experience early in my career. I was at a company where there was a layoff going on, and I care deeply about each person that was impacted. They did nothing wrong. They were all good performers. I met with one person, and I'm sitting with this person, and I'm saying, "Gee, I'm really sorry. Your position's going to be eliminated." He looks at me, he says, "Gee, is there any way I could get an extra couple of months?" He said, "I've been struggling with this, serious brain cancer that I have, and I'm going through surgery." And meanwhile, no one knew he was even sick. So of course, the company I worked for, what did we do? We said, "You're not laid off. You're fine. We're taking care of you." Um, but it's what it was a wake up for me was there's so much going on in each person's life, to your point, that you don't know. And the more you know, the more you could help. I wish we had known about him being sick earlier. We would have helped him even more. But that's the magic. It's creating the exceptions that make great companies.
And I'd like to say a few things because this is moving for me, all the things that you guys are saying. I think it's finding a culture where it's okay to say to your boss, I'm having a bad day and not be ashamed of that, right? Like, I don't feel good today. I'm depressed. I'm sad. And that's not a normal thing to say, but it should be normal. We are not machines. We're not always at 100%. Sometimes we're at 80, sometimes we're at 60, sometimes we're at 20. But I think companies that can adapt that philosophy and have that as a normal part of a conversation will thrive. So I think all of your advice is terrific. What's one piece of advice or wisdom that stayed with you throughout your career? Why don't we start with you, Michael, on that?
It's always been the same. It's I care deeply about every person I work with, to making sure that I'm bringing that positivity to them. I demonstrate care, and I'm as committed to that person as I would be to myself. In fact, the definition for me that I've learned early on in my life, the definition of success is making sure the person next to me is successful. And
Absolutely.
and to me, that's never. It's always been a part of me. Always.
How about you, Larry?
I would say, uh, the biggest thing that uh, for success is um, never stop learning. And if you have to be a lifelong student to continue to grow. When you stop learning, you stop growing. And growth is not easy. It's painful. So you have to be comfortable being uncomfortable. I have had my fair share of challenges, and it has been a constant, struggle to get where I am today. My first heart attack, I was 44 years old. I was mad because they made me stay in the hospital because I needed to get back to work. And just so happened, this is kind of a funny story. My wife would not think this is very funny, but I was in the ICU. I had all this stuff all over me, and the nurse, but for some reason, my computer bag was on the stretcher with me. And I said, "Hey, can I have my computer out of there?" She's like, she walked out, so I slipped it out and I started working on something. And my wife walks in the ICU and she's like, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm signing up for my second master's degree because I don't think I know enough about finance." So she's like, "You just had a heart attack." I was like, "So today's a new day. I got to go." So, you got to constantly learn and you have to be comfortable being uncomfortable. And, you know, it's not easy. It's not easy and nobody's going to give it to you. I don't want to sound like a cynic in that, but I think Michael, in the success of your career, it took a lot of determination. It took a lot of sacrifice. It took a lot of, grind and grit to get, where you are. And I think those are the combination of success that gets you to the next level of where you want to be in your life.
So when you look 10 years ahead, how will workplace and leadership need to evolve?
Yeah. Wow. I've been thinking about this so much. I was just the last 2 days, I was on a conference on AI and HR and kind of the future of work ahead. I think that we're going to see technology really change the
Hmm.
workplace a lot. But I still believe that we're going to use that technology, whether that's Gen AI or whatever the next generation will be, to gather data. But humans will be the ones that apply judgment. And I think that's not going to change. But I think that I see a world that understands some of the basic values that I've always had, um, like every single person was created by God with a great gift. And the magic is, how do we find that gift, shine it up, and put them in a role where that gift is what they apply against, so they can do great things in the world and for themselves. Um, I hope that we live in a world where people live happy lives, where they feel fulfilled, and when they have struggles, because it's not heaven, that there's help for them to get through that problem. I think about, you always look ahead, but you look backwards too. I've gotten laid off. I was one of those companies got acquired one day. I'm driving myself home trying to figure out, how do I tell my family we're not going on vacation this year, and I don't know where I'll, get another job. And those things taught me, the importance of really recognizing adversity is something that, we're there to help with. So I see a great positive world ahead with new technology, new kinds of ways to learn, new ways to care for each other that I think is going to change things in dramatic ways. And and who knows, maybe we'll even meet some people from another planet who'll teach us a lot more too. You never know.
So, I'll echo exactly what Michael just said. I think that, technology is going to come at us faster and faster every day. It's not going to be measured in years, it's going to be measured in advancements day by day, which in some ways is very difficult for the human brain to understand. But when I think of AI and I think of technology and I think of all of that, it is very left brained. Jimmy Carr, a famous comedian, said, AI will not replace me because AI is very left brained and the world is not left brained. We have two hemispheres of our brain. The right hemisphere is love, harmony, music, all of those things, where AI sees instruments, notes, and all of that. So I think we're going to have to blend those two. I think AI is a fantastic tool. We are building our own proprietary systems, in our company, and the primary goal of that is to ease the stress on our workforce. So, the AI is very good at running models, at aggregating data, at doing all of those things, but it can't replicate and it can't say, does this bring down stress? That is where the right brain comes in. So I think it's going to be a blend of that. I think it's going to be a blend of you will see people in leaderships using better data to make better decisions. But with that comes acceleration and growth. It comes acceleration in learning. And I think that, when you look at how we're going to evolve as a species, and be able to be better and do better, I think, technology is going to be the key. But again, it's the right use of it, as well as being cautious of the wrong uses of it. And, but doing it, for the betterment of humanity. When you look at that, my goal, for AmeriPro is to be, a tech enabled healthcare delivery system that doesn't just affect the patient from in the field, but through the entire healthcare continuum. So there's public health initiatives, there's all of these things that can impact healthcare through technology. But the other side of that is, yeah, we're going to impact healthcare, but what are we going to do to make the patient better, to get better access to healthcare, to get higher level of care? When we look at it, America right now has a 70, I think it's 76.4 years of average span of life, which is the same as other countries who have not even 1/10 of the healthcare system that we have. That's not good. We have to fix that. We have to fix that. Some of that is, I mean, we have places in our country that have less of a lifespan than people in Afghanistan. That's horrific. We should not be like that. We should be able to use technology. We should be able to use the thought-provoking leaders in this country to be able to drive those initiatives for the betterment of humanity. It's not just about margins or EBITDA or anything like that. It's about driving betterment for healthcare, betterment for humanity, whether it's mental health, cardiac health, neuro, whatever. You know, there's I'm so excited about what's coming. I'm so excited. You know, my wife's like, "Are you going to stop working?" I'm like, "I'm going to work till noon on the day of my funeral because I love what I do. I love taking paramedics and EMTs and literally changing the industry that we live in and being, you know, it's just really cool to get these letters from people like, you know, how we impacted their life." So, you know, again, echoing Michael, I think it's going to be a really cool world that we live in. And, you know, right now, hopefully when our extraterrestrial visitors fly by that, you know, I think right now they lock their doors as they fly by and say, "Kids, don't look that way." I think we need to do better in humanity, and so they can come down and have a visit.
That's good.
Well, first of all, I respect you both, not just as business leaders, but you're both simply beautiful humans. So I'm glad to be in both of this circle of greatness we have. So I'm very moving and appreciate you guys being part of the work we're doing at Headstrong and helping folks. So to everyone listening, thanks for being part of the conversation, and we appreciate you joining, and hopefully you'll listen to our next podcast of CEO Connect. We'll talk to you all soon. Take care.
This series has been brought to you by the Headstrong Project, a nonprofit on the front lines of veteran mental health and PTSD treatment. To learn more about how we're helping veterans triumph over trauma, visit theheadstrongproject.org and follow us on social media at Headstrong Project. If you have any ideas about visionary leaders you'd like to see featured in an upcoming episode, email us at info@theheadstrongproject.org.